Today we're going to be talking about some of the challenges we have with our home coffee roasting machines, some of their limitations, and we're going to be doing that while we roast a coffee that is a fruit bomb, and we're going to be doing a super light roast on the Genie Cafe. So stick around. You may own one of several different home coffee roasting machines that you bought online somewhere. It could be a Beemore, a Genie Cafe, a Fresh Roast, or quite a few other, a Hot Top, quite a few other home coffee roasting machines. And each one of those machines has limitations on the type of roasts that it's really good at. The Genie Cafe is really good at longer, darker roasts. It's a really good roaster for that. It's not known for short roasts for light and fruity coffee. So with these limitations, how are we going to find a roaster that's going to do it all? And the truth be told, most roasters can do it all, but we have to get creative. So as home coffee roasters, we can be creative, but we need to understand what we're working with. So we need to be familiar with the coffee we're roasting, and we need to be familiar with our roasters. The coffee that I'm roasting here is a 72-hour fermented Honduran coffee. It is a natural processed anaerobic coffee, which is kind of an interesting combination. This is a fruit bomb. Juicy sweetness, fresh watermelon, strawberries, raspberries, and grapes. This is definitely a fruit bomb, and I want to get as much of that fruit experience as I can with this coffee. So for me and the Genie Cafe, we have some problems, and that is that this is not a fast roaster. So one of the things that I want to do, my goal, is to have a shorter roast. How are we going to do that when I have a roaster that doesn't roast fast? Well, one trick you can do is to lighten the load. So last time I did a video here with the Genie Cafe, I roasted a half a pound. Some of you may be roasting a whole pound, and it may be taking you 15 or 20 minutes to roast that coffee. Half a pound could be about 10 and a half to 12 minutes. And my goal is to have a roast that is like 9.5 minutes long for a light roasted coffee. I want this to be a coffee that is light in color. I want it to be fully roasted, so it's going to hit first crack. And I want this coffee to have a lot of that fruit. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to have a lower end temperature. I can't really know what the bean temperature is on the Genie Cafe. It doesn't have that capability to have a bean probe. So I'm going to be paying really close attention to the color of the beans. It's going to be a little tricky because I'm roasting a dry processed anaerobic coffee. And so just that in itself is going to have kind of a color hue that I don't want to be distracted with. So I need to watch the coffee carefully. And all along, I need to be focused on making sure that I don't push this coffee too hard for roasting defects, and that I don't go so slow that I drag this thing through the roast and I get flat, boring flavors, kind of muted flavors. I have already roasted this coffee. I did 2 roasts. So I've only roasted 3 times on this roaster. The first time was the last video that I did. That was the very first time I ever roasted on this roaster. And then I did a roast with the Genie Cafe and this Honduran coffee, and it went a little darker than I wanted. It's not a light roast, it's more of a medium roast. And so this video, what you're going to see here, is my second attempt, and we're going to talk about that. So let's get going here. Let's get this roaster started up. It's already been warmed up. I am doing a pre-warm on this roaster to 375 degrees. And I'm going to pre-warm it for 5 minutes. I want it to be at that temperature. And then I will do an emergency shut-off, pull out the drum, as you can see me doing here, load 140 grams of this coffee into the drum cassette and place it in and start the roast. So here we go. The roast has been started. We started out with a charge temperature of 375, but by the time we put the coffee in, if you look and notice the temperature, it was 269 degrees. And I am setting the temperature on this roaster in this first phase, not first phase, but the first few minutes of this roast is I'm going to let it get up to 390 degrees, and I'm going to let it sit there because I want to save some of my momentum until just before the dry end phase ends. So that means I want to be able to keep my temperatures a little low, and I'm doing that for two reasons. One is I'm saving energy for a big push at dry end through the first crack. And secondly, I don't want to have high temperatures early in the roast because I don't want roasting defects. Coffee, I'm not too concerned about roasting defects, but I'm roasting light, so I want a nice even roast. I want the temperature, I want the heat to penetrate evenly into the bean. I don't want to just have the outside of the bean roasted more than the inside of the bean. We are approaching the 1.5 minute mark, and we're still now just reaching the 390 degrees. And one of the things you'll see as we go during this first few minutes here, you'll see that the temperature fluctuates. And it did that throughout the entire roast. So for some of you, you may think, well, that crosses this roaster off the list. It's no good. It's going to impact the flavor of the coffee, and I'm not going to like the coffee. I loved the coffee. It was a good coffee. And this variation of anywhere from 15 to 22 degrees took place through most of the roast. So it would get up to 390 degrees, and then it would go down to 370 degrees, 375, and then it would go back up to 390, actually go a little bit over that. So you'll see at the 3 minute mark, it actually hit 399 degrees. So this happened as we moved into this next segment of our roast before dry end, and I raised the temperature to full power, 482 degrees. I'm now starting to see color change, and I'm working my way towards dry end, and I've got about a 2.5 minute window where I want this to take place. So I'm adding more heat, and I want this coffee to turn close to 5 minutes. And again, as we're roasting coffee, we need to use our senses. We need to pay attention to the color of the beans. We need to pay attention to the smell. So dry end is coming up here really soon, and I start smelling a lot of the flavors. I start smelling some of the sweetness come out because those reactions are just now starting to take place with some of the beans. The reactions are when the heat gets to a temperature where the reactions within the structure of the bean start to react to the heat, and we start to get flavor development that takes place during this time of the roast. So we're headed up towards 482 degrees. Dry end takes place at 5 minutes and 6 seconds, something like that. And by the way, you'll see this timer that I'm using here. This timer is something that my son has developed. It's something that he's been kind of working with. It's a work in progress. And so I'm just using it here during this roast. But I'm able to mark my events and the times of the events, and it's going to calculate the phase percentages. I also was able to load in my predetermined or pre-anticipated event times, my goal event times. And so you'll see in the far column the differences of what I planned and what I actually hit and how many seconds off I was. One of the things that's really interesting, and it's fun to watch here because the Genie Cafe gives you great visibility. I've got this safety shield pulled back so that we've got some good visibility with the camera. But watch, now that we've called dry end, watch how quickly the color changes to this light cinnamon color, and the roast consistency, the color consistency gets much better as we move further into this roast. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so now we are headed towards first crack, and one of the things that I want to do is I want to make sure that I don't stall the roast, but I want to make sure that I don't push this roast so hard that for me to slow the roast down, it's going to be difficult. One of the things that I noticed is when I started adjusting the temperature downward on this roaster, it quickly moved down to that temperature. And I think the reason is because the heating element turns off, and so the fan continues to blow, and so it's pulling in ambient air into the roasting chamber, and it cools it pretty quick. So for me to move down 20, 30, 40 degrees, it can do it very quickly. So I want to be careful about that when I make my temperature adjustments on this roaster. Just out of curiosity, you guys share in your comments if those of you who have a Genie Cafe, have you noticed that? Do you know a little more on how the heating element works, especially when you start to move your temperatures downward? What's your experience been? Share that in the comments. I'd like to hear that. Also, I mentioned charge temperature as being one of the things that I'm doing lower, but more importantly, I'm using lower weight coffee. So how many of you are adjusting the weight, the amount of coffee that you roast at a time to help you accomplish a roasting profile? I'd really be interested to hear your comments on that. I'd love to talk more about that. Okay, so yeah, now look at the color of the beans. Definitely a nice, rich, kind of a reddish, cinnamony color, beautiful looking coffee. All right, so I have a target time of about 8 minutes for first crack. You can see on the app that it is calculating. And here we are, I just called first crack, 7:58. Now last week, or the last video, I was able to hear first crack without any problem at all. In this roast and the one prior to this, I could not hear first crack hardly at all. It was very difficult. And I know that some of you had commented on that. So I think it varies from coffee to coffee. All right, now what I want to do is I want to be very cognizant, very aware of my temperatures, and I don't want this coffee to go dark. And so I start to lower my temperature to 440 degrees. I did that at 8 minutes and 15 seconds. And the temperatures drop quickly down to that temperature. Crack is still taking place, but it's taking place at a lower temperature. I still have enough momentum, so the coffee is cracking, and we're going to be dropping this coffee here in about 30 seconds or so. But that is really interesting. Some people think that they have to take their coffee to 20%. Some people think that they have to wait 1.5 minutes or 1 minute or 2 minutes after first crack finishes cracking before the coffee is roasted. And I've dropped coffee while I'm still hearing some of the beans crack, but most of the beans have cracked by the time I drop this coffee. And here we go. I start to move this roaster into the emergency shutoff. Cool air is already starting to blow into the roaster before it comes to a complete stop. And I quickly take the cassette out, dump it into a cooling tray, and put it over a cooling fan to get the coffee cooled really quick. So here's the end result of the coffee. You can see it. There's a few dark beans in here that I ended up plucking out. But this is a beautifully lightly roasted coffee that I was really excited to drink. And I cracked open the beans, and the beans are this same color all the way through. So I got a nice even roast all the way through the bean. There wasn't, if you've opened up some beans before, and you should try this, open up your bean and see if it looks darker on the inside than on the outside. Maybe you've pushed your coffee a little too hard. So you want to be careful not to do that. Okay, so just for a summary of the roast profile and what happened with the roast, I had a total weight loss of about 12%, just a shade under 12%. It was like 11.95%. So it definitely falls into the light roast realm. The coffee color definitely reflects a light roast coffee. When you grind the coffee, the color is the same. It's a little more vibrant, but it's the same. You can see the color here. and it just really presents a very fruity smell, very fruity aroma. It's really wonderful. The roast profile was close in my target estimates. I did a 5-minute and 3-second dry phase. I did it just under a 3-minute Maillard phase. It was 2 minutes and 55 seconds long. 31% of the total roast was the this middle phase or the Maillard phase, and then a minute and 35 seconds or a 17% development. So the first phase I was a little faster by 10 seconds. The last phase of development I was a little longer by almost 10 seconds, and I was only like 3 or 4 seconds off for the first crack event. So I'm really happy with the way the roaster performed, and I did that because I used half the amount of coffee that I would normally have roasted, half the amount that I roasted last week. It was 140 grams, I think is what I mentioned, and I was able to get some really great light roasted coffee. So I'm happy about that, and now the coffee has had a chance to cool off a little bit, and we're going to go in for the taste. I'm tasting berry and I'm tasting strawberry that is in this. And there is kind of a little bit of a zing. I can't really put my finger on it. Some sort of a spice. My son had drank the coffee. He tried it and he was able to taste a cinnamon as well as some fruit juice. And he also got a pecan note that he was able to taste as well. So that was interesting. I didn't get any of that. He's got a much more refined palate than I do. And so it's always interesting to hear him describe what he tastes. So this coffee is a great coffee. Fully recommend it. As a matter of fact, this is a Honduran coffee you can get at the Captain's Coffee. I think he still has some of that left. If you like fruit, this is definitely a coffee to try out. So I would highly recommend it. Hear all of these people talk about different experiences with different roasters, and they kind of get reputations. And the Genie Cafe's reputation is that it's a good roaster, but it really is kind of better for slower, longer roasts. And we were able to get a shorter roast and get a fruit bomb out of it. So I'm really excited about that. I'd love to hear your comments on what you think about my approach and your thoughts if you've ever done anything like this before. I'm sure some of you have used different weights in your coffee. I asked that question earlier, but share your experiences on how you change up your profile based on the limitations of the roaster that you're using. Remember, it's important to have a roast plan. It's important to understand and know your coffee, the bean itself, the behavior of that coffee, whether it's the processing, whether it's the bean size, the density, and ultimately what your goal is for a flavor for in the cup, if you want it to be something that's got darker notes or more fruit. But ultimately it starts with good coffee, and this is definitely good quality coffee. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, this is the kind of content that I put out regularly. Please subscribe to this channel. That would really help me out. Thanks for hitting the like button. That tells other people about my channel. And always hit the notification bell so you're the first to see videos when they are uploaded. So thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a great week roasting. We'll see you next time.